Political capital is very, very different to money in a bank, right? It doesn't earn interest if it's sitting there doing nothing. You've got to use it. You got to find ways to deploy your political capital, and then if you get a few things right, hopefully it grows. But if you just sort of sit on it and hope that it lasts, it won't. It'll erode. It's not like money in a bank.
Welcome to What Matters. Our very special guest for this episode is the South Australian Premier, Peter Malinauskas. Premier Malinauskas has been the South Australian Premier since 2022, rising to prominence through commitments on huge issues, major issues such as ambulance wait times, reforming education and health. The Premier really propelling himself over the last couple of years, now widely regarded as perhaps one of the most popular politicians in Australia. A recent article in The Australian, is Peter Malinauskas our future Prime Minister? We might get there later. Peter here to discuss life in politics, tariffs, business, secrets to leadership, and of course the AFL's Gather Round, where we're here for, which descends on Adelaide this weekend. Premier Malinauskas, a very warm welcome to What Matters.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks, Andrew. That's a excessively kind introduction. But
we're kind people.
I should explain, obviously, MA's connection here. We're a highly diversified financial services firm. We've made significant investment in South Australia in areas such as office, shopping centres, logistics and housing, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Our credit funds are a major financier to a lot of businesses across South Australia. I guess it's no surprise, two of our three or four founders, including Andrew and Julian Biggins, our co-CEO, come from Adelaide. And I'm joined by one of those gentlemen today, Andrew Pridham, as always. Andrew, it's great to be here in the Premier's office.
Great to be here. Great to be back home.
Welcome home. It's good to have you here, mate.
Yeah, and I've been walking around all day asking people what school they went to.
Now, speaking of schools, there's a connection there off the top because you both went to Mercedes College.
I was at Mercedes from R to 12, good Catholic school in Adelaide, and got me out of trouble more often than not, but got me in some too. But no, I'm very grateful for the education that I was able to have, because it was an all-girls school and it became a co-ed school at some point along the road. But no, it's a good school.
Now, Premier, give us a bit of a snapshot for our listeners of your progression from Mercedes College to where we find ourselves today. I know it's a long story, but give us the summary.
Look, I've been very fortuitous. I think, in politics, you don't get to a position as lucky as the one I'm able to hold now without, really good stewardship and the support of other people around me. And I've certainly had plenty of that. But basically, I was at school. I didn't grow up in a political household. Mum and Dad were really engaged in current affairs, and they had a strong enthusiasm for the democratic process just because of my family's backstory coming here from, fleeing communism, particularly on my dad's side. Mum's side was Irish Catholic. But then I went to, when I was at uni, my interest in current affairs and how the world operated, particularly through the economy, because I started off doing economics at uni, and then that sort of started to generate political interest, because politics does matter to people's lives and the way our economy operates. So that sort of morphed at the same time I was sort of working at Woolies. And I didn't grow up in a union household. Quite, if anything, it was probably the opposite. But there were a couple of things I saw happen at work that I thought were a bit rough. So I said I'd help out. And I got noticed by the Shoppers Institute, and then that put me in contact with people in the Labor right, that are senior leaders, and things happened pretty quickly once I graduated, because I had a choice to go sort of work in a bank or a Big Four accounting firm or something like that, or work in the Labor movement. And I decided I'll try this out and committed to full-time in the Labor movement. And I ended up leading the union. And it sort of worked out well, because the Shoppers Business Union is got a very different approach to other trade unions. It's very much modelled on a engagement with the employer, pragmatically working through issues to generate outcomes for working people. And that model suited me. It's a less sort of combative approach and more sort of pragmatic approach. Anyway, so that suited my politics and my view of the world. But then I got a lot of opportunities through that exercise to familiarise myself with the political process more broadly before coming into Parliament in 2016.
From Mercedes College to the very popular Premier of South Australia.
Be careful about saying that. I'm always worried when people say that, because in politics, probably not too dissimilar to footy, politics, and popularity, they can come and go pretty quickly. Like it's there and it's not there. It depends on the day of the week, what's going on. So I'm always nervous when people say, "Oh, you're popular," because it can just go. The idea is just to do as much as you can while you can. My theory about political capital, if you want to hear it, is political capital is very, very different to money in a bank, right? It doesn't earn interest if it's sitting there doing nothing. You've got to use it. You got to find ways to deploy your political capital, and then if you get a few things right, hopefully it grows. But if you just sort of sit on it and hope that it lasts, it won't. It'll erode. It's not like money in a bank. So now that means it can be at the expense of popularity. So you got to. That's why I'm always cautious about people referencing political popularity, because if you're using it properly, then maybe it's not there forever.
I mentioned some of your big ideas you campaigned on to become Premier: ambulances, health, education. What are your big rocks in 2025?
When you say big rocks, what do you mean by that?
This is one of Andrew's favourite terms, big ideas.
What are the big issues that you're focused on?
Housing is number one. And the reason why I say that is because I think housing policy is economic policy now. We've got economic opportunity in this state unlike we've seen really in a long time. And I think one of the things that will determine whether or not we achieve it is having the right labour with the right skills. We aren't going to get either of those, though, if those people don't have somewhere to live. And we've got a massive housing shortage in South Australia. It's true around the country, but it's particularly true here. So we have got to increase housing stock, and then we're going to fill those homes with families or adults with the right skills. And if we do both those things, if we don't do both those things, we will not realise all the big opportunities we've got here to improve our economic complexity. So housing is a major focus. I mentioned skills, which is tragically not the politically sexiest policy. It's really hard to get the electorate fired up about skills policy and education policy, which is a frustration of mine. But then outside of that, there are other challenges that emerge that you're going to deal with. Like we just had this major challenge with steelmaking in South Australia, and we had to tackle that challenge. So there are things that emerge you don't expect, but the ones that you sort of can identify and the ones that are driving the most effort is that housing issue.
And clearly everyone's thinking about housing and how to fix the housing problems in Australia. And I know it's very difficult. We're a very large player in the housing market. I think 1 in 12 home loans in Australia we go through our business, so we're a big player in it. What do you think are the key decisions that need to be made from a policy perspective?
Well, I don't think all of the levers are at a state level, but I think a lot of them are. Right, so planning policy, speed of decision making around planning. We set an aspiration a little while ago to become the number one place in the country for that. And, the Business Council of Australia recently awarded us the number one ranking, along with the Housing Industry Association. So I think we've got that in pretty good shape, although I think that's an ongoing effort. But the big one here is water supply. We have done a lot of work around planning policy and we've released an awful amount of land and then rezoned it accordingly. But we've got to get water to those blocks before they can have a home built on them. And so in South Australia, there's been a massive underinvestment in trunk water infrastructure and sewage water infrastructure. So now we're playing catch-up footy and moving at the fastest possible pace to get that rolled out, which is, again, frustrating. It feels like the sort of thing we probably should have known about 10 years ago. But we are where we are, and now we're just putting the pedal to the metal. But we've done everything from there to tax reform. We've abolished stamp duty here now. We've abolished stamp duty in 2 fields. South Australia is the only place in the country that has no commercial stamp duty. But the second one is we've abolished stamp duty for every new build for first home buyers. Not existing builds, because which we get asked about all the time. Our tax reduction or tax abolition policy is being developed exclusively to derive new stock, because all the housing policy we see out there or the ideas around it are meaningless if they don't genuinely generate new stock. If it's not new stock, it's not making a difference to the long-term structural challenge.
And Premier, what are you doing to address the labour shortage?
Training people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an immigration argument?
Yep.
Yeah.
The politics of immigration are not good for people who value its role at the moment. I think you can see that playing out during the course of the federal election. But we have to be careful that we don't allow an insular domestic political debate cut off our nose to spite our face. I think people confuse immigration. Look, undoubtedly, the demand on housing in part is formed by immigration policy. I think that's impossible to deny. But if we don't calibrate things carefully, particularly around skilled migration, we will find ourselves not being able to build homes because there are a lot of jobs out there that Aussies just aren't, or I want to say Aussies, just current residents are just not performing. And we do need to have a degree of skilled migration, particularly in the building trades and the construction trades. But we also need to train more kids. And I think we made a dastardly error sometime in the 70s or 80s when we started ripping out technical colleges or trade schools or whatever you want to call them, when we started ripping them out of high schools. I think that was a really big mistake. And we're reversing that policy, and we're putting tech colleges and trade schools back into high schools. So yes, we're doing that just to generate the skilled labour that we're required to build these homes. Because it's not a 5-year proposition. This is an exercise that will last for decades.
And what role do you think conceptually government can play, Premier, in supporting property developers and institutional investors in this housing space?
I think you've got to have a stable tax policy and a regulatory environment, because like capital has got options if it wants to generate a return. And if you want investment in housing, the moment there is uncertainty in, like I said, that regulatory speed or taxation policy going the wrong way, it does undermine people's willingness to take a risk. Every investment is a risk by nature, taking a risk on the housing market versus something else. But ultimately, like I said, there has to be supply to invest in. There has to be the land. There has to be the land with water connected. I mean, you could have all the investors lined up in the world, but if you haven't got the land and you haven't got water connected to that land, no matter how much someone wants to invest, they can't build a home. So, and that is something that sits within the purview of state government. And I don't think there's enough that can be done that is associated with just rolling out supply so as to generate. We've got the demand, that's not a problem here in South Australia, so as to generate an investment proposition for people to release their capital on these opportunities.
So with the challenges with water and general infrastructure, roads, I guess would be another one. What about increasing density within South Australia? I remember when I was growing up here, there probably a multi-storey apartment building would have been 2 stories. Where do you see that playing?
I think we need more of everything. It's interesting. There was a deliberate policy that we've unwound to see that 85% of all new stock in South Australia or in metropolitan Adelaide was infill stock, and 15% was urban growth. I've removed those targets. Part of that is ideological, because, and this is, a bit sort of counterintuitive. We undoubtedly need more density, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more high-rise residential closer to the city, and we are unlocking that, and that's not uncontroversial. Like, we just approved a 20-storey development just outside the city fringe, and all the protests are occurring as you'd expect. But we're ploughing on, and my argument with those people is, if we're not building something, you're going to have kids at home until you're 40, and you have the opportunity to buy a house. I'm not going to deprive my kids the opportunity to buy a house, which means more of everything, including denser living. But it's also true to say this: why shouldn't a working family who doesn't aspire to living in an apartment also have the opportunity to have a backyard? And they will be denied that opportunity through deliberately curtailing urban expansion. So I say, and I'm not going to do that either. So we are amending our urban growth boundary. We are releasing a lot of land in terms of urban growth, with a commitment to do the appropriate infrastructure so it doesn't become urban sprawl, to use that term. But at the same time, we are eyeballing people and saying we're making tough decisions around density too, where it makes sense. And because I think you've got to have both forms of supply if you're serious about tackling this challenge. Here's what I know. If we try and curtail supply in one area to maximise growth in another, we're ultimately curtailing supply. And I want to expand supply, and the best way to unlock that is to provide the market as much choice as possible.
Ultimately, market forces determine what should happen.
Yes.
And certainly in Sydney, one of the things we've seen, I think, the last month is the state government has changed the zoning in around designated areas.
171.
And it's made a major impact on. There's so much activity going on. We'll see how it plays out with local councils who typically don't like anything happening. But it's been certainly a major stimulus, and so I think you're spot on. It's don't do one thing, do multiple things.
Yeah, look, I've seen what's happening in Sydney, and that they've got a different constraint to Adelaide. Obviously, it's a completely different market, but Sydney, the urban expansion is so large that you have no choice but to look at density. We have the luxury of being able to do both here, because there's so much more land available to us. So, and my view is I am not going to have an artificial imposition on the market that will result in one less family having access to a home.
Premier, your lens, just pivoting slightly on politics, is unique. Donald Trump, President Trump at the moment, is causing global equities and policy uncertainty across equities, tariffs, the economy, a whole range of issues. What is your take on the current implications for our country, Australia, and obviously your state?
Yeah, look, trying to crystal ball gaze into what the implications are of policy that is changing so rapidly is obviously an exceptionally difficult exercise. I don't think there's anyone in any policy-making position around the world that isn't asking a lot of serious questions about what all these changes mean. I think that does invite high-level consideration about where our nation sits and how we approach other opportunities in other markets. The question I often get asked about in the South Australian context is AUKUS, because what they see is the Trump administration, fundamentally altering its posture in terms of how it deals with the world around them. The one thing I'd say, though, is this. The tariff thing is happening and everyone's responding to it with a degree of shock, as though this wasn't anticipated. That, I think, is more a reflection upon us than President Trump. Bear with me while I explain this. He is doing what he said he was going to do. Like, he made pretty plain to the electorate prior to the election that he was pro trade barriers, pro tariffs. He made clear that he was going to execute tariffs aggressively, and now he's doing it. And everyone's saying, well, hang on, what's going on here? Well, he said he was going to do it. In respect to AUKUS, which people they try and say, well, all this other uncertainty, what does this mean for AUKUS in Australia? All of the remarks out of the Trump administration regarding AUKUS have been positive. They haven't critiqued it, they haven't criticised it, and they've shown a lot of ease in criticising policies of former administrations, both Democrat and Republican. So I think it'd be reasonable for someone to assume that if they haven't criticised it now, then they're not likely to, except for the fact that they've been saying, like I said, only positive things about it. So in terms of for my state, we're confident about AUKUS for a range of reasons, because it's an intergenerational policy anyway that sort of transcends any particular administration of any particular political hue. In terms of trade, though,
just on AUKUS, I mean that what you're saying, I agree with. But that's very much from a US lens of what they think about AUKUS. What do you think our view should be from our perspective? We're $3 billion we've ponied up for the nuclear submarines. What do you think our response should be, given there seems to be a negotiation?
That's a good question. Well, I accept, particularly in other parts of the country, that AUKUS doesn't invite or doesn't enjoy unanimous support, clearly. But my frustration about the AUKUS debate that we've had domestically is no one seems to be arguing for an alternative. Like, people feel comfortable criticising AUKUS, but no one's got a credible alternative. So, for instance, the normal thing you hear people say is, oh, we shouldn't be spending all this money on building our nuclear submarines. We should just go buy them from someone else. But then you ask that person, well, where do you think we're buying them from? And they literally do not have an answer, particularly if they know anything about submarine production globally. No country that is producing submarines is producing them fast enough for themselves. The whole idea of AUKUS is that the UK and the US are looking to allies to step up. And this is central to Trump's defence doctrine. They are looking for allies to step up their industrial production dramatically. And AUKUS is exactly that. If we decided as a country, oh, look, we're going to put this to one side and go do something else and go buy them from somewhere else, no one is selling because no one can sell them to themselves at the moment. So I'm a supporter of AUKUS because if you accept it as an island continent in a geopolitically sensitive region, so I think it's putting it mildly, if you accept that necessitates submarines, then you have to accept the responsibility of being able to build them for ourselves.
Part of President Trump's argument for the tariffs is trying to rebuild the manufacturing base, certainly in Middle America. South Australia is probably a good parallel there in that manufacturing, again, when we grew up, we had multiple car manufacturers here, and manufacturing was a big part of South Australia's history. Do you see that's going to come back? Can it come back, or is global market forces sort of preclude that until it is what it is?
I don't think that Australia is about to wake up and start to be a major producer of basic consumer items that are lower in the value chain. But I absolutely think that we do and should increasingly produce high-end manufactured goods, things that are more value-added and got more IP embedded within them. And that is happening as a country. It's certainly happening here in South Australia. Much of our economic performance to date, and this isn't well known across the country, but we are outperforming the rest of the nation on a suite of metrics in terms of economic performance. The manufacturing sector has been growing its footprint, particularly around high-end value-add manufacturing in the space industry, the defence sector, amongst others. And I think that's where we want to be. That's where we want the policy effort. The only, I guess if you were going to say exception to that is I do think there is the necessity nationally for us to retain sovereign capability to be able to produce items that are critical to our nation's economy that we can't find ourselves exclusively dependent upon overseas producers, like steel, for instance. Not exclusively steel, but that's a really good example.
I think in South Australia, Tom, everyone thinks of South Australia producing a lot of fantastic wines. But it's
that's a form of manufacturing in a sense.
Well, especially really it would be meat pies, flavoured milks, those sorts of things, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't describe that as the eye, but my word, there is some good flavoured milk here.
Farmers, yeah. And the Haig's chocolates. I mean, I think one of the worst things that's happened to South Australia is when Haig's opened a shop in Sydney.
Sydney, yes.
It's certainly stopped me coming back. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of high-end manufacturing, I suppose if you were going to draw a chocolate analogy, it would be I haven't ever asked the Haig family what their margins are.
Would you peppermint frog or just a...
No, I don't like peppermint in my chocolate. I like nuts in my chocolate.
Dark chocolate or...
Dark scorched almonds.
My wife would like you.
No, I want almonds in dark chocolate every day.
I've banned it from our house because I'm going to demolish a whole...
Oh, it is. I know, it's more... It's not cheap.
It's expensive. South Australia is a place to do business. We've already touched on it. But if you were starting a business, Premier, in South Australia today... what sector would you look at?
Well, if I had the capacity or the knowledge, I would want to sort of participate in anything that is defence or space related. They are genuinely growth industries, where there is no shortage of demand that's escalating, and the challenge for the market to be able to meet that demand, and that then results in a number of spin-off benefits in terms of, producing other items that are of value, but that would certainly be what I would point to in the first instance.
And what areas of the economy do you think are underutilised by private capital, and where is the greatest need, do you think, for capital at the moment?
That's a good question. South Australia's footprint in tech, particularly around AI, is not fully appreciated around the rest of the country. So we are home to the Australian Institute of Machine Learning, which is what it is ranked the third best AI institute globally. It has got some of the smartest minds. It's connected to Adelaide University. We've had it in South Australia going back to 2015, 2016. They were there on the ground floor. They are incredible human beings working there, and we've seen there where they've intersected with private capital. There's been some amazing results, but I would like that to be better understood in other parts of the country or in capital, people who have capital to invest, because we've got to participate in this part of the economy as a country, and I worry that we're underdone at the moment.
One more question about infrastructure, because I think we have touched on that, and there's obviously a lot of spending going on with the South Road and other things. In 1841, the toll house at the top of Glen Osmond Road was built to facilitate the South Australians to be able to travel from Adelaide to Mount Barker. Was that an early sign of planning for the gather round? And that's part A. And part B is, why is South Australia the only state in Australia, I'm not sure about Tasmania, but we'll get on to annexing Tasmania in a second to South Australia, that doesn't have toll roads?
No, we don't have toll roads. Look, that's a point of difference that most South Australians would thoroughly endorse and would seek to maintain. In fact, I am not aware of a Sydney-sider or Melburnian coming to Adelaide and think, oh, my word, I miss paying tolls. Well,
everything in Adelaide takes 20 minutes to drive to, so obviously you're building new roads because it's now taking 25 minutes.
That's right. Well, we are home to the biggest road infrastructure project in the country at the moment. These tunnels, it's a huge program that we're building with the
Not even slightly tempted to slap a couple of tolls on?
No, I'm not. And look, as a stated policy position, I know it might seem crazy to others, but we don't think it's necessary here, and long may that continue from my perspective.
We mentioned Mount Barker. It's a great segue into Gather Round, which is where we find ourselves this weekend. There's a tremendous sense of excitement, which is palpable. You get to the airport, you see the signs, huge influx of tourism, it's filling up hotels. There's all the rounds of football here this year. You've been a co-architect of this. It's a fantastic event.
I'm so grateful. Like I don't know if I might have told Andrew this story, but I was at home on a Sunday, and like you get, every sort of Premier Minister gets a weekend bag of files you got to go through, and lots of it is routine. But every now and then you stumble across files that are sort of, you have to make a decision or rule something in or out or whatever. Anyway, I was going through this file, and one came through from the Tourism Commission, and that doesn't, they're not a prolific producer of paperwork, unlike other agencies. Anyways, and I was like, oh, the AFL is contemplating this, and this idea of creating another round where every single game's played in one place. And the recommendation actually was to let it not pursue
let Sydney have it. That was their idea.
Yes, that was, and it was actually I remember it pretty much said the idea is that it goes to, but they're asking others if they're interested. And I was like, I stopped and I thought about it, and I thought, this is bloody amazing. Why would we not want to have a crack at this? So, I've changed the recommendation and put the paperwork back in, and I called Gil McLaughlin. And I just called him, and he didn't answer. And I left a message, and I said, I want to let you know I've just got this file. I said, I don't know where you're at on your timeline, but please do not make a decision on this until we get a chance to speak in person. And then one thing led to the other. And I'm so happy because because little did I know that it would turn into a juggernaut. And when we were going for it, I thought, will this even work? Like, will people travel across the border to watch their team play when everyone else is doing the same thing? I don't know if it's going to work or not, but my hunch and my instinct was that it would, but you just don't know. And now it happens. And I mean, this year we've got like the numbers on last year through the roof, and then which are numbers are through the roof on the year before that. Yeah. So we're onto something here. We've got to keep the momentum going.
So the agreement ends next year is the last year of the current agreement.
I've got to keep my eye on you there.
Well, you've always got to keep your eye on me. Who knows what could happen? But in terms of if you were to extend the agreement, and obviously, in my view, as the gather round gets bigger and bigger every year, what ideas are rattling around in your head to make it bigger and better in the next incarnation?
Well, I'm really keen to see how the Barossa goes this weekend, and not just the footy, but everything that happens in and around it, because the Barossa is a sort of a reasonably sized region, so we put on all these hop-on, hop-off buses just to see if everyone sort of gravitates towards that. That unlocks, I guess, other opportunities potentially elsewhere. I think that where Gather Round has future opportunity, without giving too much away, is what makes Gather Round unique is 18 teams, one city, one state, one time, right? So apart from just having the games, what are we doing to bring everyone together in a way that punters can get around? That I think we need to think about a little bit more, because we have to think about what makes Gather Round unique and then maximise the opportunity for engagement, both from fans but also commercially around that. And my feeling is that we have only just begun unlocking that opportunity. So watch this space if we do.
So what are your thoughts? The prospective 19th team, Tasmania, have obviously made some noises that they'd like to hold the Gather Round in 2028 and onwards.
Yes.
In Tasmania, obviously with a lot of gin.
Yes.
I come back to my earlier idea of annexing Tasmania to South Australia. But what are your thoughts there?
Well, I just don't know if it'll work there in the same way it works here. That's the truth of it. And we want to see it. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how you get how you do that with a 19th team. Like, how do you make it work? Because one of the beauties of it is that everyone gets to play at the moment. So that is a detail that's going to have to be worked through. But I just, in a number of respects, it's not going to work in Tasmania in the same way it does here, because you can't drive there as easily as you can from Melbourne, and there are a lot of people driving here. Yes, there are a lot flying, but there are a lot that drive. And Perth to Hobart, that's a fair hike, whereas Adelaide's just that fair bit closer. So, and also while the Tasmanian Tourism Ministry is obviously a big deal, it doesn't enjoy the size and the city of a state such as ours that just is able to accommodate the demand. So I don't, while I'm, from a parochial perspective, I'm cautious about their agitation, but I'm no less confident that this is the best place to do it.
And major events such as Live, Golf and the Gather Round, what do you think it does for the psyche of South Australians?
A lot more, but what matters more to me is the psyche of the rest of the country and how they look at us. That's what matters. South Australia's we have to sort of try and battle and fight for a bit of attention, because, we're obviously a far smaller jurisdiction, smaller city. We're not Sydney and Melbourne, and we're not going to be.
You're playing to a comparative advantage.
Yes, that's right. And we want the rest of the country to go, what's going on over there, and realise there's more to it than what initially meets the eye.
And for the football aficionados listening to this, is it true that one of the terms of the agreement that you nutted out with Gil McLaughlin, which I remember, I was standing just near you when you did it, is that you do get to select the umpires for all Crows games?
How did you find out about that? Did you hear me say that?
Gil told me, actually.
Yes, and it's working a treat thus far. It's cost him a finals appearance. It's cost him a chocolates on the weekend. That's a joke, by the way, for Crow supporters.
By choice.
I'm very candid as a premier in a two-team town.
Yeah,
I'm very candid about my my affection for one club over another.
Well, the talk at AFL House is that you were very, very keen to actually do the fixture for the Gather Round.
That's true.
And
that actually is true.
I know it is true. For next year's Gather Round, who would you fixture Port playing?
Well, I did like Hawthorn this year just because of the drama of it all. Or right now, I prefer we're playing
University Blacks.
Yes.
We'll get to that.
Right now, I wish we were playing West Coast this weekend.
Oh, apologies to all West Coast fans.
Right.
You've been touted as a future Prime Minister. You've already achieved spectacular success as the Premier of South Australia. Andrew gets touted all the time through my channels as the future head of the AFL Commission, the chairman down the track. So maybe you can lobby Andrew on the scheduling and keep him gathered over here.
We can do a deal right now.
We'll keep things moving along. We've designed a little 60-second quiz.
Okay, so
Premier.
short answers, right?
Short answers, please.
Not my void burst, long answers.
No, they're great. But we'll try and get through as many of these as possible.
You got it.
And we've got some reserve questions at the end. Best way to build consensus?
Listen as much as you talk.
Will Port finish above the Crows this year?
Absolutely hope so. No, just don't rule it out, that's for sure.
I can see the fence you're sitting on there.
Yeah.
How do you handle pressure when making tough decisions?
Own it. Someone said to me, a sports person said this to me, pressure is a privilege. And that is true. Like when you're under the pressure, try and enjoy the moment.
McLaughlin.
It was a Adelaide Thunderbirds netballer.
Couple of quick ones. Morning routine?
Get up, alarm goes off about 4:45, get up, read the paper and go for a run in the gym. And then when the kids start to wake, the chaos commences and try and get 4 kids to where they need to be on time.
And the obligatory one from a former journalist, would you consider moving into federal politics at the appropriate time to become Prime Minister?
No. I feel very lucky. I had an opportunity to go into federal politics before I came into state politics, and I made a conscious decision to do this, and I don't regret it for a second.
When business is dealing with government, and a lot of our listeners will do that on a regular basis at a really high level. Andrew does it every day. What are some of the common pitfalls that people make, and what's some advice you could impart there? So
I try and have an as open door as I can to people with serious propositions for the state in investment. Like, people do get to come in here and give me their thing. My advice, look, and it's hard to appreciate this until you probably do it yourself. Like, you could not, I can't overstate, like if a premier or a treasurer or a serious minister for industry or whatever, they get a million propositions all the time. Like you just get prospectuses and ideas and asks. They just, hundreds, thousands of them, right? So, the best advice I can give is that when you do get that moment to present, come in with your lay down and get to the point quickly, right? Because we're sort of back-to-back half-hour meetings, one after the other. And I feel for people when they chew up the first 20 minutes explaining their backstory, and then the last 5 minutes they're trying to cram in what it is they're actually looking for. We understand that people are going to have asks as government. That's the way it works. Get to the lay down, get to the point relatively quickly, because that's in everybody's interest. That's that's not meaning to sound it's all transactional and people aren't interested in context and stories. But I'm talking about you dealing with the political class, because that's an opportunity you want to make the most of and try and.
I think that's a great lesson for anything, Tom. Is get to the point.
Get to the point.
Yeah. Who's
more powerful in South Australia, Andrew Pridham or David Koch?
I'll say Andrew Pridham. Sorry, Koshy.
I just want to touch on your football career, Premier, if I could. I think you played around 130 games for the Adelaide University.
No, you're underdoing me.
I've got to check these stats with your staff. How many games did you play for Adelaide Uni?
About 180, and then about 30 or 40 for a Kenilworth Footy Club, yeah.
And is 207 goals shortchanging you, or we've got good?
It's not overdoing it, that's for sure.
I'll check the verification team in corporate advisory at MA Financial. Anyway, my question is, Gil McLaughlin played a similar amount of games for Melbourne Uni Blacks in Melbourne. He was in the Carlton reserves at one stage until David Parkin, I think, infamously sacked him. Said, Gil, you're better off going to business. But who's a better footballer, you or Gil McLaughlin?
Well, on that record, Gil, because all my footy was low grade. But then I did this handball competition with Gil and on the footy show, and he made it. There was every indication that he was taking it. He was
training for weeks.
Pretty seriously, and I was grateful to walk away with the chocolates that day. So, but I suspect Gil was a far better footy player than me in his day.
But then Andrew Dillon with his lethal left hand.
I had him all right on the right. But on the left, he did.
So are you preparing for this weekend?
I haven't, and I am doing it, I think. This might be the last year.
That's the Sunday Footy Show handball competition.
Yes, it is.
Where you'll take on Andrew Dillon.
But he is a demon. He played in 6 premierships.
In the MOs.
Yeah. He was always a good footballer. You don't play in 6 flags unless you're doing something right.
Yeah.
And we were about even on the right, and then on the left, he murdered me.
Which is ironic, really, isn't it?
Touche.
Andrew, always a pleasure. You've got the AFL dinner and Friday night, the Swans taking on Collingwood. It's a massive weekend for you, so good luck.
It is, and good luck, Premier, Collingwood being here on Friday, because the crime rate in South Australia is going to be up, and the police are going to be very busy.
The SAPOL's got an overtime budget to account for it, so
I think it's going to cost a fortune.